Okay, we're at a minute past. Let's get started. So, hi everyone. Welcome to Getting IT on Your Side. I'm Laura Stringer, the founder and principal at Ninth Fourth. We're a boutique advisory firm focused on digital product management. We help companies define, create, and champion digital products and ecosystems so you can think clearly, move quickly, and grow your business. I've heard from a lot of folks that they dread having to go to IT for anything. IT is really hard to work with. They never get anything done on time. They just refuse to do stuff. So today we're going to dive into some of the reasons for that and what you can do to form a more effective partnership. And if you have any questions, you can enter them in the bottom right of your screen, and we'll get to them at the end. So let's jump in. So you're trying to build or manage some kind of a digital product, a website, piece of software, an app, whatever it might be. And every time you need to do something, it has to go through IT. Adding a feature, you need to go to IT. Getting your agency's new designs into production, that's IT. Complying with privacy laws, IT. But they always seem to say no, and when they do help, it takes forever, and it's never quite what you wanted. Why won't they help you out? All this extra time means your projects are slowed down, which delays business growth and ROI. And sometimes they just say no when you've already spent money or committed resources. They're costing you budget, time, and reputation, not to mention that quality seems to be compromised for the sake of what exactly? Well, it may surprise you to learn that IT doesn't hate you. Well, probably not. But there's a whole lot going on in their world that you may not be aware of. And that disconnect causes a lot of the churn you're experiencing. So today we're going to talk about that disconnect, how you see IT versus how they see themselves. We'll cover some of the many constraints IT is working within that make it hard for them to do what you want, even if they want to do it, and how that causes some of the problems you see. We'll explore the different kinds of communication styles you might see and how they can cause extra conflict. And I'll go through some tangible and a couple less tangible things you personally can do to ease the situation and get IT on your side. And before we jump in all the way, I do have a quick poll. I would love to hear from folks what kinds of things you are asking IT to do for you. What are you struggling to get out of them? This is a long list. Pick as many as you want. I'll give everyone a few seconds. Wow, there's a little bit of a lot of things. So it looks like about a third of folks, so because this is multiple choice, we don't have exact percentages, but it looks like a lot of folks are looking for website development and maintenance, getting agency code into production are really the big ones, as well as project management, requirements gathering, and UX or visual design, which is a little bit surprising to me, are the runners up. And then coordinating with my agency and all kinds of things really are about 17% of you are saying that. So I'm finding that really interesting. So let's close that. And if you have any questions specific to those that we do not get into, here, I think I can share some results really quickly. If you have any questions related to any of these specifically that we don't cover during the course of this, you can feel free to ask it as a question or just reach out to me afterwards. All right, so let's move on. So if you're wondering what qualifies me to talk about all of this, I spent the first 10 years of my career in IT at a Fortune 500 enterprise. I held roles from server administration to project and product management and a few in between. Then I spent the next several years in digital marketing departments working closely with IT to manage major websites, data systems, and other digital products. And while my colleagues complained that IT never did anything for them, I had a lot of success getting their help and support. So today I'm going to tell you the mindset and the specific things that will help you accomplish that. So let's first talk about how you may think about IT, how a lot of marketing and business folks think about IT, and how they think about themselves. And you've probably seen this meme floating around the internet, what my parents think I do, what my boss thinks I do. And this is what that could look like for someone working in IT, right? Society hears IT, they think computers, technology, and basically magic. They don't know. Friends and family of IT workers might picture them churning out code as some kind of hacker. And I'm guessing if you're on this call, you see IT as blockers an awful lot of the time. And what do they think? Well, a lot of folks in IT, including myself at one time, think of themselves as order takers. Requests come in from all over, they process the request with little to no input of their own and move on to the next one. For the record, I almost replaced this barista photo with a punching bag, and that would have been pretty accurate as well. But in reality, IT spans a whole lot of different types of disciplines, and most of them involve simply sitting at a desk. Aside from the folks who come to fix your computer, most IT workers follow the same dress code, sit at the same type of desk you do. They have jobs from writing code, managing projects, figuring out budgets, or trying to keep hackers out of your data. And in all of them, IT people are just people. And that's a really important point, because you'll never get along with IT if you don't sincerely approach them as humans and professionals who are every bit as invested in the company's success as you are. That's going to be the foundation for every piece of advice I give you today. So if IT workers are just like us, then where's the disconnect? Well, IT traditionally has played a support role in most companies. Before digital really took off in the last couple decades, IT were the people who fixed your computer, set up your phone, that kind of thing. It was mostly transactional. They were a cost center. It was basically maintenance. And today, that still hasn't changed much as a lot of companies. IT is like this invisible black box that only gets noticed when something goes wrong. When everything goes right, life just moves on, and the best they get is a pat on the back. But the worst part is that IT is not considered part of the business. Even today, as technology plays an ever more important role in everything from supply chain to product development to marketing, the words IT are still said separately from the words the business. And that causes a lot of tangible problems when it comes to creating and maintaining digital products, including your corporate website, by the way. And it also causes a feeling that IT just isn't part of the team. That's a problem for them, and it's a problem for everyone else. How are they going to be a valued partner or member of your team if you see them and they see themselves as just support staff? Okay, what is it like to work in IT? And how does that experience impact their attitudes, their agreement or refusal to work on something, and the kind of job they do? Well, the biggest thing you need to keep in mind about IT is that they are operating with significant resource constraints. I know, none of us have the budget or the staff we want, but trust me, IT has it worse. In all my IT jobs, I only once ever had almost the resourcing I needed. Most of the time, IT is working on a shoestring budget and a skeleton crew. Once when I worked in marketing, the key technical lead working on my product was spread so thin that he was routinely working basically 14-hour days. Sometimes he just worked all night. I was so terrified that he was going to burn out and just stop showing up for work. We would have been in a seriously bad place without him, but his leadership couldn't get him any help because their budget was already maxed out. Even when IT in general has a large budget, a lot of that goes to specific major projects, and other teams have to sacrifice to make up the difference. And on top of that, they're one of the first departments to get outsourced or cut. And that means that a lot of what the IT department does is done by contractors who are only there for a year, so they're not as familiar with the company or its systems. Another important thing to understand about IT is that the systems they work with are extremely complex. There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of dependencies, a lot of interconnections, and a lot of ways to approach any given problem. However, on the surface, something either works or it doesn't work. And since most non-IT folks don't know and don't care about what's going on under that surface, they're not willing to grant extra time or resources to do things the elegant way. Between the lack of resources and the time crunch they work under, they sometimes have to cut corners. And at first, that's not such a big deal. As long as things are working, everyone's happy, right? But it does open the doors to problems down the road. For one thing, they may not have time to vet requirements and get real user input. Once upon a time, I was allotted 8 weeks to build something that should have had 8 months to build. Someone handed me a 2-page list of requirements that I really wanted to confirm for myself, but there was no time. I had to jump right into implementation. It turned out the person who collected those requirements missed a really major one, and the end product only met the needs of about half the users. On the other end of development, sadly, testing falls victim to time and staffing crunches quite often. Without thorough testing, you run the risk of launching something that works a lot of the time, but not always. Lastly, and this is a big one because it's kind of invisible, I want to talk about technical debt. And if you haven't heard that term, technical debt is a problem we get when we keep rushing out changes. Like I mentioned earlier, that rush leads developers to cut corners and put out something that works, but maybe it's inefficient or hard to add on to or throws errors in certain conditions. And with a perpetual rush, they never get a chance to go back and clean up their work. So over time, the code becomes so disorganized and error prone that everything is slowed down and even routine work becomes difficult. So your next request that seems like it should be simple might actually be very challenging because of that technical debt. Eventually, they might have to stop new work entirely just to redo old stuff. And I've seen that happen once. To put it in financial terms, the Consortium for Information and Software Quality found that in 2018, technical debt cost US companies over $500 billion with a B. So it's a problem that we really want to avoid. But at the same time, there's this constant message that whatever IT is supporting is mission critical and cannot fail, cannot be late, cannot ever have any hiccups. Sometimes they are working on something mission critical, sometimes not so much, but their customer in the business insists that it is. Either way, their job performance will be rated on treating that thing like it's the most important thing on earth, because everything is critical to someone. So no matter what breaks, no matter why it breaks, IT is going to get yelled at. And sometimes the tiniest mistake can have big consequences. When I supported a Fortune 500's web servers, there was a process that was entirely manual, and if you forgot to type one tiny little command, you would bring down the entire server and a whole slew of websites. We were all so careful, but it was such an easy mistake to make that everyone did it at least once. And then your stress level went to 11 for the rest of the day. And let's not even get started on information security. If they screw up, you could wind up with lawsuits, government fines, and lost customers, and they know that would be on them. IT are humans, and they make mistakes just like anyone else does, but their mistakes can occasionally have major consequences. And if you're thinking, that sounds really stressful, well, yeah, that's a major problem in IT departments. The lack of resources combined with the instability of the job, combined with working on mission-critical systems, it creates a whole lot of stress. To keep quality and efficiency up while lowering the mental load of the complexity, they find ways to work smarter. In part, they become highly process-driven. That process makes work more efficient, faster, and less resource-intensive, and it removes a lot of opportunity for error. Because IT work is so complex, it's useful to have a process that enforces documentation, makes sure the right steps are followed, and simplifies the work. Can IT go around the process? Sometimes. Sometimes there's a process for circumventing the process. Sometimes they can do it, but it's risky, so they'll only do it in very specific cases or as a favor for people they like. And we'll get into that in a few slides. And yes, sometimes the process is there to meter the incoming requests or to ease their workload. Certain departments get just flooded with requests and cannot possibly keep up. And one of the ways they sometimes deal with that is to shift some of the upfront legwork to you, making sure it's a serious request and slowing the demand just a little so they can handle it better. So let's look at how that might all come together and affect your work. Let's say you want to create a store locator for your website. You've had your agency design the locator, and they even built most of the code for it. You just need IT to hook up the store database and throw it online. But IT says no. Maybe we can't get to that until November. Maybe it's you didn't get the right approvals. Or maybe it's just, no, we won't do that. So why might that be? Well, first of all, just hook up the store database is way more complicated than it sounds. That database might be 10 years old. It might need some kind of update in order to integrate it into your locator, and that update isn't in the budget. And while your agency developed the locator, your company probably uses a content management system or a CMS for its website. The locator needs to be rebuilt as a CMS widget. That's very specialized knowledge. There's only one person in the whole company with that skill set, and they're already over allocated to another department's project. Plus, the CMS is slated for a major upgrade in 2 months. And in order to make sure they don't break anything during that process, they've put a freeze on new widgets. And once you get that widget built, who's going to make sure it stays up to date? What if someone changes the store database? Your locator could break. So IT likely has a process for getting new widgets built, which will include ownership, governance, putting it into a CMS upgrade testing plan, all kinds of things. Introducing something new requires a lot of touch points with other systems, departments, and people. IT are the folks responsible for making sure that happens correctly. So while you're thinking, just throw this code on the website, they're thinking of this entire other universe of things to consider. Because if they throw your code on the website and it doesn't work, who's going to get in trouble? Okay, so let's turn now to some of the miscommunications we end up with between IT and the rest of the business, and how it can exacerbate problems like the one I just described. I am about to talk in generalizations here. Obviously, there are always exceptions to rules, and in fact, I've been the exception. You probably know people who don't fit these molds, and that's fine. Anytime you're dealing with people, obviously, you use your own people skills and instincts to guide those interactions. So while IT workers are people, just like you and me, they do tend to think with a little more structure, especially the more technical folks. Whether that's because technology attracts structured thinkers or because working with computer systems makes your thinking get structured, I don't really know. But either way, they communicate really well with lists, bullet points, diagrams showing how things will fit together. They speak literally and specifically and with detail because that's what their work needs. And as with most fields, technology has a lot of its own jargon, from technical terms like multi-factor authentication to help desk terms such as tickets to product management terms like sprints. IT has its own sort of language. It helps to have an interpreter, and most IT departments have a team of essentially client managers who can serve that interpreter role. These days, in my experience, there aren't nearly enough of them to go around, and you will increasingly need to deal directly with engineers and network administrators. And I should mention here that that client management role is another one that takes training and experience to do really well. It requires a strong understanding of what you're trying to do. And a good client manager in IT is worth their weight in platinum. A larger problem is that because we tend to think of IT as a support role, we don't always bring them into important conversations early enough. We think, we'll figure out what we're going to do and then tell IT about the little piece of it that we think they need to do. And that causes a few challenges. First, remember when I said they already feel like underappreciated order takers? A lot of that mentality comes from stuff like this, where no one felt it was important to bring them in for a planning session. Moreover, if you don't give them adequate heads up, they won't be able to plan for the work you need them to do. They're going to have a lot of dependencies that you don't know about. Technical dependencies for sure, but also staffing dependencies, ties to other projects, all sorts of things. And if you tell them in August that you need them to do something in September, it might just not be possible. And finally, you might be asking for the wrong thing. What if you commissioned that store locator and it turns out the agency built it in a programming language that IT is moving away from? What if it's making assumptions about what fields are in the database and that data doesn't actually exist? That's going to cause a lot of churn in your project because either they'll simply say no, or they'll scramble to try and accommodate your request. And that's going to accrue that dreaded technical debt, pull resources from other initiatives, and then those other departments are going to get angry. And it drives up cost as they bring in contractors to fill the gap. And at this point, you might be thinking, but Laura, I know best what I need, and IT is there to support me by building and configuring the things I've decided I need when I decide I need them. And I don't care what's going on their end. And to anyone with that mindset, which I hope is not many people, I'd say you're doing yourself a major disservice. First of all, you may not actually fully understand your need. A client manager or analyst from IT can help you think through your goals and how to meet them. They may also have suggestions you haven't thought of, because while you're the expert in your job, they're the experts in technology and how the company is using it. They'll see opportunities that are not visible to you. They can also help you coordinate with other initiatives and digital products. IT is a centralized function, so they have insight into not only your needs and activities, but those across the rest of the company as well. They can identify opportunities to work together and gain efficiencies. When I ran an IT web team, for example, we saw it all. We worked with every department that had anything to do with the website around the world, and we knew what both the right and left hands were doing. And that's something the business areas themselves didn't know. Finally, if you're here on this webinar today, chances are you've been tasked with building or managing some kind of digital product. Well, IT has been doing product management for decades. They don't always use all the buzzwords, but they know the techniques. They know how to run an efficient development lifecycle. They know how and when to do testing. They understand how your cool designs fit in with the technology. If you're lucky, you might even have a requirements analyst and user researcher who can suss out the end user's needs. But if you don't bring them in until you're 60% through the project and ready for a deployment, you'll miss out on all that expertise. So at this point, we've explored how there may be a disconnect in how you perceive IT versus how they see themselves and the various constraints imposed on them by the company. And we've touched on where there might be some communication breakdowns along the way. Let's turn now to what we can do about it and how we can form more effective working relationships with IT. I want to mention here that the absolute best thing would be for a company to start treating at least parts of IT as a crucial partner in the business. Give them more funding, give them an official seat at the proverbial table, instill a culture in which IT is so much more than the tech people. Remove some of those constraints that cause all the headaches for everyone. But unless you're the CEO, and some of you might be on this call, it's probably not in the cards. Definitely advocate for that wherever and whenever you can. And in the meantime, let's see what is in the cards. The first thing you should do is make friends with IT. As I've touched on, this is a group of people who only ever get noticed when things go wrong, but they're always there behind the scenes, almost always underfunded and overworked, holding things together with duct tape and wishes 24/7. Please shower them in appreciation. Treat them as full equals and partners rather than fancy computer janitors. Because if you treat them as partners, they'll be better able to be partners. Take them to lunch or a Zoom call. Get to know them as people. Find out how many kids they have, what they're passionate about. Ask about their jobs, friend stuff. What do they actually do all day? Especially if they're not working on your thing, right? What's going on in their world? Along those lines, take some time to learn more about various IT functions. You can do some Googling on your own. I also highly recommend asking your IT folks. Again, particularly the ones you touch most often. That will help deepen that relationship because you're showing interest in what they're doing. And additionally, learning more about the work of IT means you'll also learn more about the jargon and vocabulary they use. Having a few more words in common will strengthen communications and help get both teams on the same page. And ask how you can be a better customer. There might be simple things you can do to make their lives easier and free up some time and energy to support you better. In some cases, oh my God, in exchange, you can ask them nicely, of course, things like, why do I have to fill out this lengthy form every time I need you to restart the server? Why do I have to apply for a new domain name through you instead of just buying it from GoDaddy? In most cases, they'll have good answers. And in some cases, the answer will be, well, that form is from 2007 and we hate it too, but no one has the bandwidth to update it. And that brings me to my next point. A lot of the things you hate about IT hates about IT. All those constraints I mentioned earlier don't just affect the work they do for you, it also affects the way they work and the environment in which they do it. So a lot of their policies and processes and forms get just as outdated as the code. And it's not like they can stop incoming requests for a year while they revamp anything, although I guarantee you they wish they could. And they don't have the resources to maintain their own stuff while also handling yours. This is why I advocate never blaming IT for problems. When a problem arises with our digital products, we tend to get into an us versus them battle with IT, each side batting a problem back and forth at the other side. That's not productive. It doesn't fix the problem. It just makes everyone angry and resentful and stressed out. So instead of sitting on either side of a problem and yelling back and forth, try reframing it so that you and IT are on the same side and the problem is over there. That way you can address it together. It's so important to keep in mind here that when there is a problem with something IT is doing, it's rarely their fault directly. And if the problem is with IT, it's organization-wide most likely, and not something that your specific support team can address. So you're going to need to figure out an alternate solution. And the only way to do that is to work together. Just like the absolute best IT client managers understand their clients' work, you'll be a better client if you understand their work. I'm not saying go out and take a Python class unless you want to. Just get a basic understanding of how IT works at your company. What's the process for getting new stuff out to production? Do they keep a deployment calendar? If so, you can plan around the milestone dates. How do they handle testing? And how much time do they try to take for that? Do they do requirements analysis, or do they just assume whatever you gave them is correct? Knowing what they're going to do with what you give them will empower you to give them what they need to do the best job possible. A lot of IT departments use a common ticketing system to track their work. Even when that system is a really bad fit for the type of work they're doing, they're very often required to have tickets open for everything they do. And then they get dinged if the ticket is open too long. If you can work with them on that ticketing system, you'll be a better friend. You can open appropriately sized tickets so they can assign work directly to the right people without having to split up tickets and create new ones. You can reference ticket numbers when you ask about things so they don't have to go look it up every time. And here's a big one. When you're using an agency for some of the work, keep IT involved. Teams work closely with an agency for design work, front-end code, sometimes back-end code, and then they just throw it over to IT. And a lot of time, the agency's code doesn't work. Sometimes it's bad code. A lot of times it's because they're using slightly different server configurations. And I don't want to get all technical here. Just trust me when I say this kind of thing happens all the time, and it's always a headache for everyone involved. And most of the time, everyone blames IT, and it's on them to prove that they didn't break everything. Also, trust me when I say it's rarely their fault, and there's often nothing they can do at that point. So make sure they get to talk to your agency before the agency does anything, and hold that agency accountable to IT's technology standards. And when problems do come up, remember to get on the same side as IT and put the problem over there. And if you take only one thing away from this webinar today, make it this. Bring IT to the table early and often. No more tossing a request over the fence once you've decided what's going to happen. The second you think you might have an idea for something you might want to maybe do, call IT. They should have a representative at the very first visioning meeting and every meeting after that. That's going to be your single biggest barrier against running into problems with IT. That does mean you're going to ask IT for their input into your project, and you will listen to it. Like I've been saying, IT knows what's going on around the company as well as under the hood of whatever system or tool you're planning to work on. They'll be able to identify dependencies, risks, and potential opportunities that you might not be aware of. They can start laying the groundwork for whatever they'll need to do, start planning resources, or do any of the work that needs to happen first. That avoids roadblocks down the line and can even potentially help speed things along. And you will still hear no sometimes, but you'll hear it much earlier in the project before you've committed time and resources, before you've announced anything to a large audience. Sometimes IT says no because what you're asking for literally is not possible without spending more money than the company even makes. You'd like to have that info up front, right? And other times they say no because there's some sort of constraint blocking them from moving forward. They don't have the right staff, they're not allowed for some reason. Maybe they have another project taking up all their bandwidth right now. In that case, having that knowledge early on is really helpful because you may have an opportunity to help them work around it or mitigate it. If you wait until the moment you need them, you'll get that no when it's too late. And then keep bringing them to the table. As things change, you'll need fresh insights. So your visual designs were planned to take a month, but now we're on 7 weeks. Instead of saying, oops, IT, you get 3 less weeks to build this thing. Ask how they think things should proceed. You might need to push back the launch date or cut a feature or two. Maybe they can get it done in less time by cutting corners. And then you need to plan for them to go back and fix those corners in order to avoid technical debt. And lastly, this might be difficult depending on your organization, but make an attempt to foster a culture where it's okay to fail. We hear this all the time from major tech companies, a culture of failure, and that's for a reason. They're not saying you should never try to succeed. They're saying that in order to succeed, especially quickly, and really especially when you're doing something new, you're going to hit snags. You're going to have ideas that don't work out. Earlier, I said that IT folks tend to go unnoticed when everything goes well. But when things go wrong or when something breaks, they get yelled at. Even if they took on a ridiculous request that had a 90% chance of failure, gave it their absolute best attempt, and actually nailed part of it, they'll still just be in trouble for the parts that didn't work. That needs to stop. It's terrible for morale, and it also makes IT unwilling to take risks, and that will lead to more no's. If you make it okay for them to fail sometimes, they'll be more willing to take on tougher or riskier work. And again, I'm not saying make it okay for them to do a bad job. Just acknowledge that what they do is extremely complicated and it's not always going to work out exactly right. And this one is something that will take time. You won't change your company's culture next week, but you can start planting some seeds of this idea. So maybe this time next year, you can see some improvement. Okay, by now you should have some more insight into why IT does and says the things they do, the way they think about themselves, the pressures and restrictions they work under every day, and how differing communication styles and attitudes can impact the support you get from them. Hopefully you can start to see IT in a different light, not as a frustrating blocker opposed to everything you're trying to do, but as a team of smart, hardworking people with valuable skills and hidden knowledge that you can tap into as you build and manage your websites, software, and other digital products. And you have some concrete things you can do to start moving things in the right direction. Do these things, and you'll be able to form and leverage more effective relationships with your IT teams so that you can conquer projects together. I hope you found this helpful. If you're struggling particularly hard with this, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to talk through it with you. I've got my email address on the screen now, and I'm also including a link to my Calendly, which is a service you can use to book a call directly with me at your convenience. We do have time for a few questions, and I don't see any yet, but if anyone has any questions, again, please type them in the bottom right of your screen, and we'll be able to take those. So I'm going to grab a sip of water. Okay, it looks like this was such an informative webinar that no one needs any clarifications. So with that said, please reach out to me if you are still feeling a little unsure about where to start or anything like that. Let's talk about it. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here today.